Over the years, I've been making many videos around the Staveley area. You've allowed me to show you things like abandoned track beds, old bridges. We've got the canal that was lost and is now being brought back to life. But today, I'm at Barrow Hill. I'm at Barrow Hill Roundhouse and Yard, just to tell another story related to the whole industrial history of Staveley. This was the Staveley Works site, or at least some of it. Greenery is now its main output. Compare this to the vast network of industry and railways that we can see on these old maps and these old aerial images from Britain from above. Apart from the odd decaying remain, very little survives. The land for the time being seemingly contaminated, unusable or unwanted. But let's not get into that debate here. We're here today on the outskirts of Chesterfield to tell you about two survivors of the legacy of the Staveley Works and its surrounding infrastructure. That's Barrow Hill up there. While much of Staveley's industrial railway network has vanished, this remarkable roundhouse survived. More than 150 years after it was built, it remains one of the last tangible links to the world that once existed here. And today, it's Britain's last operational railway roundhouse. But it's not the only survivor, because hidden within the story of this roundhouse is the story of a small steam locomotive that once worked these very railways. And this is the story of half cab 41708. But will a recent setback prevent this Staveley survivor from coming back to life? This is Adam. You might recognise Adam from the clown videos. You all right, Adam?
I'm not bad, thanks.
You were just showing me this, because this is a familiar photograph, isn't it? What we're looking at here then?
This is the LMS station in Clown. And it looks like all the passengers are going to the seaside, hence the displays. There's another couple of pictures there, look.
That's a familiar view, isn't it, that? So that's on the Clown Greenway, if you know it these days. You'll find lots of things ongoing, lots of different projects ongoing at Barrow Hill. There's obviously a big commercial presence. A lot of companies operate from here. We've got the Deltic Preservation Society, which we're very familiar with, just in the shed next door. We've got the Baby Deltic project just over there. That's an interesting story. That's well worth a video in its own right. That's the grey locomotive you can just see there. Yeah, we've got the Pioneer diesel team at work over there. I think they're working on the Class 46 at the moment. Adam's going to just give us a quick guided tour of the facility here at Barrow Hill. Then, what's your favourite part of Barrow Hill, would you say, Adam? You've been kind of volunteering here now for almost a year, haven't you?
Yeah, my favourite area is the yard. I like the yard. When I come here, I do a lot of weeding. Cause that's sort of my forte from the tunnel project, and I come here like once a week, and if the weather's fine, which it isn't today, we usually just do a bit of weeding and make it all look nice. We've just recently had the Rail Ale Festival.
Yeah.
So all this roundhouse was virtually empty, and now all the locos are back in. It feels more like an engine shed again now.
The history itself to the roundhouse is fascinating. A lot of people in living memory will remember when this was a working engine shed, but we've got a lot of the old features like this, like the sheer legs that was used to lift locomotives, and you've got the blue, the spider, is it called, that's sat out at the front of the shed. So the main purpose of my visit to Barrow Hill today is to discuss this. This is the half cab 41708, and there's a fantastic story behind this. At first glance, 41708 doesn't look particularly remarkable. It isn't a famous express engine, it's never hauled prestigious trains, and it certainly wasn't designed to be the star of the railway. In fact, locomotives like this were the workhorses of Britain's industrial railways. Built at Derby in 1880, 41708 spent its life doing the unglamorous but essential jobs that kept industry moving. Out of 185 Class 1F locomotives built to this design, only one survives today. This is it. For the final decades of its working life, between 1947 and 1965, 41708 was based here at Barrow Hill. Between duties, it was serviced at the Roundhouse before heading back out onto the sprawling railway network serving Staveley Ironworks, the very railways we've explored so many times on this channel. Before arriving at Barrow Hill, it even played its part in the war effort, spending time on Derbyshire's Melbourne Military Railway, where railway personnel were trained for military operations. Like many steam locomotives, 41708 could easily have disappeared forever. Withdrawn from service in 1966, it seemed destined for the scrapyard. Instead, a small preservation group stepped in and saved it. And what followed was a remarkable journey that saw the locomotive move around the country, appearing at heritage railways and preservation events for decades. But despite its travels, Barrow Hill remained an important part of the locomotive story. I was only here in April, Adam, and what I like about coming to Barrow Hill is you can come so regularly. I only live up the road, and everything's just configured differently. You know, all the locomotives move around, like you've just mentioned with the Ale Festival.
Yeah.
It's different locomotive on the turntable.
Sometimes you can get your Deltics coming in off the main line, and then, you know, Harry goes up there, does his shunting and comes back again. So it's quite active, but today seems to be a quiet day. I'm not surprised with it being raining. We're
not here to give a warts and all account of the locomotives that are here. Well worth a trip to Barrow Hill if you're in the area or if you're not in the area. In my opinion, it's a fantastic facility and visitor attraction. I think I have to agree with you, Adam, when you said this is one of your favourite parts. I love coming out here and seeing what's on the roads, because you get a lot of visiting engines as well, don't you? Mm-hmm. And again, since ours last year, all these have been moved around. In July 1998, the Roundhouse itself was celebrating a remarkable survival story. After years of uncertainty, vandalism and the threat of demolition, Barrow Hill reopened as a museum and heritage railway centre. Among the locomotives invited to mark the occasion was 41708. More than 30 years after the end of steam at Barrow Hill, the little half cab returned to the place that once had been its home. The reunion proved fitting, and in 2005, 41708 returned once again, this time for long-term storage. But there was a bigger ambition taking shape. The hope was that one day the locomotive would become a permanent part of the Roundhouse collection. That ambition became reality in 2018 when Barrow Hill purchased the locomotive from the 1708 Locomotive Trust. For the first time, the future of the locomotive and the future of the Roundhouse became permanently linked. The next question was obvious: could 41708 steam again? Detailed inspections were carried out to assess the condition of both the locomotive and its boiler. Encouragingly, the results suggested that a return to steam was achievable. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be cheap. Half cab 41708 finally had a realistic path back to working order, and in 2022, major components were sent to the Tyseley Locomotive Works, where specialist restoration work began.
This section of track here is called the Ash Pit, and if you look, you can see where the sleepers are from that Class 37 there, the beginning. You can see it dips down. Well, that used to be open, used to be a pit. The bricks from the old coaling stage have been filled into that, and it's all been just left.
So was that where they just chucked all the ash and all the clinker and everything that came from the steam locomotive?
Yeah,
boxes?
You know, just to clean it out and that, yeah.
Yeah. This is my favourite view in Barrow Hill.
I love this view. Yeah, it's my earliest memory when my granddad brought me here. And you used to see the passenger train go up there. On the open days, it was a steam event.
Yeah.
And there were Great Westerns. It was fantastic that day. And then we went, I think it were 4 years in a row, from 2002, 2003, 4 and 5. You know, growing up, it was always my highlight. I used to do little odd jobs from my grandma and granddad, and I'd get a bit of pocket money. And then when the rail exhibition used to be on in there, I used to get little models, and yeah, it was great, that.
I think British Railway Blue's certainly winning the competition at the minute, isn't it? Growing up, I was never a fan of that. I always thought it was a little bit boring compared to some of the Network South East and Intercity Swallows, etc. But it's really grown on me. I really, really like it now. As the restoration gathered pace, the picture became clearer, and some parts of the locomotive were in better condition than expected, and others revealed just how much work still lay ahead. There was encouraging news from the boiler. A cracks identified during inspection was successfully repaired, while work on the backplate was already well underway. Elsewhere, progress on the motion proved equally positive, and components were cleaned, inspected and prepared for reassembly, while the cylinders and pistons were found to be in generally good condition. Even the axle boxes, often a source of expensive surprises on steam locomotive restorations, required only routine repairs and refurbishment. But as the engineers worked their way through the locomotive, they uncovered the true scale of the challenge. Years of service in an industrial environment had taken their toll. The rear end of the locomotive, including the frames, footplate and coal bunker, had suffered extensive corrosion after decades of exposure to heat, water and coal dust. In some areas, the metalwork was simply beyond economic repair and would need to be replaced entirely, and new sections of the frame had to be fabricated, while large parts of the bunker would effectively need rebuilding from scratch. Similar issues emerged on the front of the locomotive, where corrosion in the smokebox door and inner ring meant further replacement work was required. Fortunately, not everything needed rebuilding. The main smokebox wrapper remained in good condition and could be retained, and in perhaps the most unexpected piece of good news, the cab steps, one of the few surviving sections at the rear of the locomotive, were found to be fit for reuse. It was a reminder that restoring a 145-year-old industrial locomotive is never straightforward, and every repaired component brought 41708 a step closer to steam. But every new discovery brought additional time, complexity and cost. Even so, progress was being made and the project was steadily moving forward. Interesting seeing piles of these collected, because on the disused railway walks that I've done over the years, you find stuff like this, you know, by the trackside, discarded down embankments, just buried in undergrowth.
Do you know the purpose for them? You find these all down the Greenway in Clown or on Linear Park, all scattered down the side or broken. But what they're actually for, I'll show you with this one. It's for points of signalling. So you'd have one of these, which you find again, and they fit in there. Like
Eventually.
that, eventually. And then your cable or your wire would go through there, and then the roller keeps it on the wheel. So,
yeah,
you know, that's for your points. Or well, it's just holding the cable in place, you see.
Yeah, I'm assuming it'd be for, is it for signal or is it because the points are a little bit more cumbersome, aren't they? They're like rods rather than wires. What I like about these is when you find these, I say in the wild, you know, inside of disused railways. I always like looking like some of them have got years on, haven't they?
Yeah, what's this one? Is it I can't see this one. 1927.
But in autumn 2025, something happened that nobody saw coming. Criminals targeted Barrow Hill and stole vital components belonging to the locomotive. Pipework, brass fittings and copper components disappeared. Years of careful planning suddenly faced a major new challenge. And thankfully, the locomotive's major components were already safe at Tyseley, but the consequences were still significant. And by this point, Barrow Hill had already committed more than £150,000 towards the restoration. Before the theft, the remaining work had been estimated at a further £125,000. But suddenly, the project faced the prospect of raising a substantial additional sum simply to replace what had been stolen. I have to admit, whenever I come to Barrow Hill, I always seem to get more excited about the diesel locomotives, especially to see what's parked outside. But they do have some fantastic old historic steam locos as well. And this is one of my favourite ones. And of course, because I've got an interest in the Great Central Railway and all the history behind that, all the videos I've done on that, this is an old Great Central Railway locomotive. Look, Butler Henderson. It's great to see something remaining like this from the Great Central Railway era. I think this is 1919 this was built. For some projects, a setback like this might have been the end. But then again, neither Barrow Hill nor 41708 would still be here today if people gave up that easily. The restoration continues, the work at Tyseley carries on, and the ambition remains exactly the same: to see one of the last surviving links to Staveley's railway past steam again from the place it once called home.
Reaching that goal won't be easy. The restoration's already required a significant financial commitment, and following the theft, even more funding is needed to replace the missing components and complete the work. But thanks to the determination of Barrow Hill, the restoration team and the supporters of the project, progress continues. If you'd like to help bring 41708 back to life, I'll leave the details of the restoration appeal in the description below. A heritage railway fundraising is an incredibly competitive world, and money is tight. There's countless deserving projects out there, and every organisation is fighting for the same limited pot of support. But this is one story that really resonates with me. Having spent years exploring the lost railways in industries around Staveley, I'd love to see one of the last surviving links to that world steam again. I genuinely hope this project succeeds. So more than a century after it was built, and almost 60 years after it was saved from the scrapyard, the story of 41708 is still to be written. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on another video soon. Ta-ra!